Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Sarah, and I have the absolute pleasure of being with Lisa Roberti today. She's an absolute wonderful friend of mine, and she's very passionate about wildlife and advocacy. And so, before I share her bio, I just wanted to say, hi, Lisa, and how are you?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me here. I am really excited to have this conversation with you.
I am too. I mean, how many people do you know, have been to Africa, who have been on safaris? It's just an amazing sort of bucket list item that a lot of people want to do, but never make the time or get to. And so, well, I'll read your bio. So, Lisa started traveling earnestly to wildlife rich destinations around the world over 30 years ago, and she absolutely fell in love with the stories of the animals that she encountered, both individual animals and then learning about the different species as well. So, although she's not formally educated on wildlife biology, the knowledge that she has picked up about animals through her curiosity, speaking to experts, and personal observation has really helped her to share fun and informative information to other animal lovers. Lisa has a very, very interesting blog, which we'll talk about later. But she specializes in Africa and has taken photo safaris in 10 different countries in Africa and spending about 3 months a year on safari now. She shares her photographs through social media and the stories of the animals on her blog. And she also shares the issues that the wildlife are facing through habitat loss, hunting, and climate change. Her images are for sale and on gift items in her store. And she's currently working on an African safari planner, and several books about the different animals that she's encountered on her journeys. So, Lisa, as I just said, your travels have taken you across 10 different African countries. What was the first safari moment that really changed you, and where were you?
So I love this. I have loved animals my whole life, and I'd always dreamt about going on safari. And I'm like, I didn't even know how to do it. It's like, how do you even go on safari? I didn't know. And I ended up going to a presentation where this just a normal guy was showing his slides from his safari. And I was like, he was just a normal guy. Cause I'm like, oh, this is just for movie stars. I'm like, how did you do it? And so I learned,
Yeah.
like, he helped me plan my first safari. And my first safari was to Kenya and Tanzania. And I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And I spent 6 weeks.
Wow.
It was a year's salary. I saved up a year's salary, cost me a year's salary. It was a 6 week journey, and I was able to do it because he showed me, like, he helped me get through it. And that's actually why I'm doing the African Safari Planner, because I want to be able to be that person for other people to hold their hand while they're planning it. But to your question,
Yeah.
I still remember, so this was over 30 years ago. I still remember walking down the stairs of the plane. I flew into Nairobi, walking down the steps of the plane when my foot hit the tarmac of the runway. And it was like, so it was overwhelming. Like, my dreams finally became reality. I was finally there. And 30 years ago, the Nairobi airport was way different than it is now. But it was
Yeah.
just it was just such a dream come true. And then, of course, everything I was able to witness and be a part of during that journey, I was hooked from that moment on.
Absolutely incredible. I have had a very similar experience in that I have a deep affinity for Japan for some reason. And my first trip there, I went by myself. I had a friend who lived there. But anyway, I remember as the plane was touching down,
Mm.
I just burst into tears. I was so thrilled that this like dream had come true. So it is such a moving experience.
Yeah,
To,
yeah. I'm glad you've experienced that too, because it's hard to explain to people who've never had that, like, that
yeah,
heartwarming. Yeah, Japan's on my list.
incredible.
Yep, one day I'll get
Well,
there.
hey, I can help you with that. So, but and vice versa, when I'm ready to go to Africa, we can swap notes there. Okay. You also often describe individual animals and their stories, especially on your blog. Your recent blog post was about baby elephants, which, you've got to go read that one if you haven't. Can you share a particular animal story that's really stayed with you?
The first one that comes to mind is a really sad one, so I don't want I don't wanna
Oh,
share that with you.
okay.
But so
Yeah,
one of the things that I love to learn, and I will, I like to learn the story of an individual animal,
yeah,
because learning the story of the individual, it connects people more. So I can tell a story about a cheetah,
sure.
or I can tell a story about Nashi Pai. And Nashi Pai is a cheetah who lives in the Masai Mara. And she is a really successful mother. Raising cheetah cubs is so difficult, because they're the lowest on the food chain. So when a cheetah makes a kill, the hyenas will steal it from her, leopards will steal it from her, lions will steal it from her. So it's really, really hard. And then it's nature, but it's still hard to learn about. So cubs will be also killed. Hyenas
Yeah.
will kill cubs, leopards will kill cubs. So for a mom cheetah to raise her babies to adulthood is really a huge accomplishment. And so Nashi Pai, she is this wonderful mama cheetah that lives in the Masai Mara, and she just recently raised 4 cubs to adulthood. So she raised all of them. She had 4 cubs. They all raised. I have photographs of them when they were like really, really
Oh
little. And I
my
just
God.
went back and I saw them again. And I have photographs of the cubs just before she left them. And now they're on their own. And yeah, so it's just to make an individual, to give them a name, to show pictures
Yeah.
of their babies, their cubs, as opposed to just this is just a random animal. I feel like it brings more empathy, and it makes people a little bit more like, knowing she has cubs, she has a sister, she has a mother, she has, somehow brings in a little bit more empathy and interest.
Yeah.
So hopefully to get people more engaged and maybe wanting to learn more about how to save them.
That's so incredible. I was just thinking back, I've shared this with you before, but both sets of my grandparents were very were world travelers. They both sets enjoyed that very much. Um, One set did do an African safari in the 90s, and the other set, while they didn't, they went to New Zealand and places like that.
Mhm.
The African safari thing was maybe a little much for them, but um, I remember watching a ton of like wildlife documentaries and just exploring that, or even going with them to like travel bookshops when that was a thing. And hearing speakers talk about their journeys. And so I'm mentioning this because I wonder if that was also something that you experienced with your family, or was this just on your own as well, that you had this affinity for learning about, wildlife?
Yeah, interesting question. I really didn't get it from my family. My we did like family vacations that involved like
Yeah.
swimming pools and time together. We would drive places and spend time on the beach
Yeah.
and play tennis and golf. But I'm really the wildlife lover in my family. I don't know where it came from, but it's always been that way. I've just always been more attracted to animals than to people. I'm kind of an introvert,
I
and
hear you.
much more comfortable around animals, and and that's very unusual in my family. So
Mm.
yeah, just yeah.
Well, so for those of you listening, you cannot see that Lisa's, I think, in her office, and she's got a ton of
Mhm.
books around her. And so I know that you have a couple on standby that you wanted to talk about. But I know that you mentioned there's one in particular that really sparked your love for conservation. Can you share more
Yeah.
about that?
Well, so this book, this is called Animal Underworld: Inside America's Black Market for Rare and Exotic Species.
Ooh,
And the author is Alan Green. Now, this is an old book. It's from 1999. So it's
okay.
quite outdated. But when I read this, it was current. And what he talks about is it's mostly about the captive animals. Now, I grew up, my parents took us to the zoo, they took us to the circus, and I absolutely loved it because I loved animals. And the closer I could get to animals, the more I felt like I wanted to be close to them. So I've done things like I've taken pictures with lion cubs and tiger cubs, and now I wouldn't ever dream of doing anything like that because now I
Yeah.
understand. And this book helped me understand that. Um,
Mm,
I have a hard time still. Like, I don't believe in circuses with animals because I understand the trauma that those animals go through and the abuse that most of them go through in order to perform. zoos are hard because it's like, that's how so many kids grow up loving animals. And it's probably the only place, and the zoos are getting better. And as long as they can not take animals from the wild to put in the zoo. So I mean, I have a hard time. It's a huge moral
It's
kind of
complicated.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what this book did, it really opened my eyes. And again, it's old. It's from 1999. And what they talked about is they talked about the captive animals in the zoo and in the zoos and what happens. So zoos are nonprofit, but they are there. They have to make money, right? They have to make money to feed their animals, to pay their people,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
advertise, to get more people in. And so what brings in people? Baby animals.
Yes.
So you have baby giraffes, baby elephants, baby anything. But what they don't talk about is, okay, an exhibition area has only so much room. And in a lot of species, males and males do not cohabitate together in a small, especially in a small enclosure.
Right.
So what happens? So this zoo has an adult male giraffe, an adult female giraffe, and then they have a baby boy giraffe. Well, as this baby boy giraffe is growing up, what do they do with them? So there's only a certain amount of accredited zoos that they can transfer the animals to, and he traces these animals. Again, this is old, so he traced these animals, and they ended up being in exotic meat butchers.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so it was horrible. Now he did this whole thing and brought it to light. It's like people like this that are bringing it to light to affect change. So that's why I said this is super, super old. But it's things like that people, I was completely
unaware of.
I had no idea, just like your reaction, like that you just had.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what happens to these animals? And people aren't asking those questions. Like, and it's not just happening in captive zoos. So there's another book. Let me see, where do I have it? Oh, here, this one, Cuddle Me, Kill Me. This is a book written by Richard Peirce, and it is a book about South Africa and how what they do, or what they did. And again, because of this book and because people became educated, it has made change. So what they were doing is they were taking tourists, would pay a lot of money to go to South Africa to raise these lion cubs that were orphaned. And then they were going to be rehabilitated back into the wild. Well, that was all just fabricated lies. And what they ended up doing is they took these lion cubs and put them into canned hunting farms, where these lions were now acclimated to humans. They're not scared of humans. They're not worried.
Oh God.
And then they're put into captive situations where they're killed for sport.
Yeah.
So again, this has changed now in South Africa. It still happens underground, but it is not as common.
Right.
So it's books like this, it's things like this. It's the research that these people did. Now, this guy, he just did an amazing documentary called Blood Lions, and it's not a book. It's I don't think he wrote a book. I think it's just a documentary talking about the lion bone trade and what's happening with that. And so again, I'd say we'll get off the sad stuff in a minute.
No, it's good to educate all of us about this.
But it's things like this that we don't want to know about, but that when it brings it to our attention and it brings attention, that's when we can make a change, and that's when we can make a stop. And this is what got me really involved in, I've always loved animals, I've always loved wildlife, but now in the conservation, now it's like, okay, yeah, I would love to hold a baby tiger, but I'm not going to do it because that edifies me. But what about the poor tiger? Now I know better. Now you know what I mean? So it's like you have to remove your desire. Like they still have in South Africa, you can still walk with cheetahs. Is that really in the cheetah's best interest? Where did those cheetahs come from? Why are they there? Why are they tame? Why are, and to start asking these kind of questions. Would I love to hang out with cheetahs? Hell yeah, I sure would. But I'm not going to, because it's not about me. It's about their welfare. It's about, you can see how passionate I am about this situation. And it's so interesting because the more I learn about conservation and how do we affect things, the more I realize how complex and complicated it is. It's
Right.
it's so hard, and I am just so glad I'm not the one making the decisions. But I want to help educate people about what is going on so that hopefully they can make more, smarter decisions in what they're participating in.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing about that. And I mean, as heartbreaking and horrifying as that is, it's something that really nobody talks about. And so it's fantastic. So I will also share the books that Lisa just mentioned. I'll put that in the description for the podcast. If you want to check it out, check those books out, you can.
Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you one question about, as you said, you're not formally trained as like a biologist or a wildlife biologist, but you have such a deep knowledge that you have now like honed. Um, what would you say that is something really impactful that you've learned, not in the classroom, but like in real, in real situations? I mean, obviously you just answered that question with, not holding baby tigers because, to what benefit is that? But are there any other observations that you have discovered?
Well, I think at one point, as I was learning about conservation, I
Yeah.
I thought like, this is so easy. Why don't they just do A plus B, and then everything is resolved? And then you're like, well, if you do A plus B, then that introduces C, D, and E issues, and it's so complex.
I
And I
see.
used to have such a judgment. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Botswana and Kenya were the only two countries in Africa that did not allow hunting. And all the other countries allow some sort of hunting. I am not a fan of hunting, especially trophy hunting, when you're just going to kill an animal just because he has the prized horns. Like, that to me is so wrong on every level. But even unless you're hunting for food, like I have a real problem with hunting, because I love animals so much. I can't even imagine killing. I'm not a vegetarian. I'll be honest. I am not a vegetarian. But I can't imagine being the person to do that.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that vegetarian thing in a second. But what I realized, so Botswana has just recently, and I think it's in the last 2 years, but don't quote me on that, have just recently allowed hunting of elephants again. And
Oh
my
dear.
first reaction is exactly that. Like, oh my God, I'm never going to go to Botswana again. They're allowing hunting. Like, this is horrible. But it's so complex because there are so many elephants in Botswana. And the infrastructure, the nature areas can't hold
Can't support that many elephants.
support it. So what do you do? Can you relocate them? How much money does that cost? What's that going to be? And then elephants have this extraordinary sense of place, and they're going to go try.
They're going to return.
So it is so complex. And it's like, and this is why I said, I'm so glad I'm not the one making these decisions, because my heart couldn't handle it. Is culling them the only answer? I don't culling. Is that the only answer? I don't know. Is there other answers? There probably is, but where's the money going to come from? What are the other answers? And so what I've learned is to stop being so judgmental, because I was very judgmental for a long time about the whole conservation thing, is to stop being so judgmental about it and really listen to the different ideas and perspectives and the reasons why things are being done the way they are. And then
Absolutely.
hopefully at some point be able to just throw out some alternatives if I happen to have some. There's people way smarter and way more educated than me who are working on some of this stuff. But I find that especially on social media now, when there's something that's talked about, that there are so many people behind like the social media just ramming without really understanding the complexities of the issues. Like, I'm never going to be somebody to support culling a herd of elephants, but when you look at it, what's the alternative? Like, and I'm thinking, like, we're not the ones to decide who lives and dies, and it's such a huge topic. So one of the things I've learned is I know nothing. Like, the more and more I learn, the more I realize, like, I'm a preschooler when it comes to this stuff. And I probably know more than 98%
absolutely.
of the general public when it comes to conservation. And I know like nothing. So yeah.
Mm. This is also such a specialized field as well. I mean, and just so localized to those specific areas too. So I can't even imagine like all of these topics are so complex, as you just said. Um, Now, many of your blog posts, for me, they feel like short stories. And this is why I keep telling, I keep mentioning like, go check out Lisa's blogs. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of great photographs as well. Are there any sort of like narrative techniques that you maybe borrow from fiction or that you use to help bring these animals to life for your readers? Or maybe it's just naturally like you're just telling their story?
So I just want to address my blog a little bit. I kind of got very behind. I've got so many stories I want to write, and this is not my full-time job. I actually have a full-time job. And then all last year I was battling breast cancer. So I had like many, many months of treatment that wiped me out more than I thought. And so actually I haven't been much on social media lately because I'm just trying to take a break, but I want to really tell the stories. I think for me, I just want to tell what I'm learning. I want to see what they're doing and just share it. So other people I am very fortunate to be able to work remotely and to spend 3 months in Africa and to be in the wild and be in nature and see the lives of these amazing animals just unfolding before me, and to go back and see them again and again. Yeah. And I just did on my social media, I get to see the cubs growing up, and I saw them when they were babies, and now I'm seeing them as subadults, and I get to follow their lives. And sometimes it's absolutely tragic and brings me to tears. And other times it's just like, oh my gosh, I saw you when you were this big, and oh my gosh, you're all grown up. And I did some images on my social media of like, this is what I saw them like when they were babies, and now this is what they look like now. And this is so cool. I totally forgot your question. I'm sorry.
Oh no. With your blog and talking about the different stories of these specific animals, I think I just wanted to highlight that you really go into a lot of detail, and there's a lot of great photographs for people to check out. Now, speaking of writing, you're also working on a couple of books right now about some of those animals that you have encountered, perhaps even the cheetahs, maybe, I wonder. And can you give us like a little sneak peek about like which animals or?
So far, I have the books, and actually it's going to be a series of books called Valor and Vulnerability. And it's talking about the triumphs and the difficulties that these animals have to face on a daily basis and throughout their lives. So I had written one, it was actually completed, about tigers. And then
very cool.
Oh my gosh, you were asking me about stories. Now this is India, it's not Africa. I do mostly Africa, but let me just tell you real quick, if we have time, about this story.
Absolutely.
Tiger called Mr. X. So so when I'm talking about a specific tiger, I also tell about like just species behavior, because to understand how special this tiger is, you have to understand species behavior. So in tigers, the males impregnate the females, and they have nothing to do with their cubs normally. So Mr. X was a very different male tiger. We saw him. I got to watch him, and he was hanging out with the mom and the cubs, and he was the babysitter, and mom would go hunting, and then she would come back and bring food to dad and the cubs. And I never saw mom, but I saw dad with the cubs, and there's the water hole, and it was so beautiful, and it was amazing. And then I found out a few weeks after I had witnessed them all together without seeing the mom was killed.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And Mr. X took care of the cubs. This is something that is just unheard of. So he took care of the cubs. He was feeding the cubs. He was doing all those things. So tigers are I don't know if they're critically endangered or endangered. I'm not sure where they fall, but they're endangered. So the park personnel, what they decided to do is they're like, well, we don't know how long. It's very unusual for a male tiger to take care of cubs, and we don't know what's going to happen. So they took the cubs. There was 3 cubs. They took them, put them in an enclosure, huge. I mean, it wasn't like a cage. It was a huge enclosure. to raise them and then eventually start teaching them how to hunt. Well, Mr. X, he found them, found the enclosure, tried to break into the enclosure, and spent, I think it was weeks, laying on the side with the cubs on the
Oh my God.
enclosure. So this is an extraordinary individual tiger. I mean, it's bringing tears to my eyes. And so that was one of the stories. And I've got photographs, and then I tell the story. And then I was getting ready to publish it. And I'm like, you know what? I want more. Like, I only have a
Yeah.
little bit. And so I was due to go back to India. And I'm like, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to get caught up on all these animals, all these tigers I wrote the story about. And then I'm going to publish. Well, then COVID hit and my trip got canceled.
Oh.
So even though I did get updates on their stories through
Yeah.
social media, and I have friends over there in India that, keep me updated, I didn't. And so then it got put on the back burner. I never published it. And now I'm like, oh, these stories are kind of old now. What do I do? So I will publish it eventually. And then the second one I started writing was lions. And that one, I have the stories. I have some super heartbreaking, sad stories, and I have some amazing stories. And it's hard because it's like, well, when do I stop? Because I keep going, and I keep, and I keep seeing the same guys and the same cubs. And so it's like, I want to keep adding to the stories. And I thought, well, if I publish the story, then I can have a website where people can go to and get updates about their lives. And so I don't know. It's all, yeah.
That makes a couple of things. Like, Mr. X is extremely progressive, and that is incredible, that story. But it also, this reminds me of James Herriot, his books that he wrote. Those were fictional, but based on real life. And he just couldn't stop writing. He had so many stories. And in those books, you have reoccurring, characters. And so maybe it'll be something like that, where the series just continues on, and you can, you'll have Mr. X will, come back again, and you'll have more to say about him. So who knows? But I love that. Okay. So if you could recommend a fictional book that really captures the spirit of the wild, or just one that's personally moved you, what would it be? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Can I recommend a nonfiction book that really moves you?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. This is the one I was telling you about before. This is called The Elephant Whisperer.
That's right.
And it's from Lawrence Anthony. And this is a true story. And it is a true, beautiful conservation story. So this is conservation that's working. So we talked about stuff that wasn't working earlier when we started talking. This is actually a story about what worked. And so what happened was Lawrence Anthony he and his wife took a hunting concession. They bought it and turned it into a nature preserve. And they were turning it over, and they were bringing in species and stuff. And he was contacted about a herd of elephants that had gone rogue and were causing a lot of damage. And if they didn't find a place to put them, to relocate them to, they were going to kill them all. Yeah. And so although he wasn't quite ready to take them on, he decided he was going to take them. He didn't, his whole thing was conservation, saving animals, saving species. So he's like, how can I not take this herd of elephants? So what happened was, there's laws that have to be in place. There has to be a certain amount of land, different things for different species. So he had to get everything put into place. So he was delayed a little bit before they could move the elephants. And unfortunately, before they could move the whole herd, they shot and killed the matriarch and one of the other ones right in front of all the other elephants.
Oh my God.
So the other elephants, had massive trauma. And so they moved them then into his place called Thula Thula, and it's in South Africa. And it's the story about how he related to these elephants and how he treated them and how they became to know that this was their new home. I mean, at one point they break out and they try and go back to where they were from, which is what I was talking about before. And just talking about all the heartbreak that he went through trying to save these elephants. And he does. And it is just it's beautifully written. The beginning is a little slow, but if you can just bear with it, then it will, I couldn't put the book down. It was amazing. I've read it twice already. because the story is just like, it's just so good. It's the good in people and the
Yeah.
perseverance and keeping going and not giving up on a species or in this case, it was elephants who
Right.
couldn't help themselves. And so it's such a beautiful, beautiful story. It's
Is
my
this
favorite
the
book now.
is this the book you had mentioned slightly something about like the elephants were mourning and like they also like on the they
Yes,
remember and they had come back once a
yes,
year to a specific
yes.
spot.
Yeah, yeah. So when Lawrence
Lovely.
Anthony passed away, he was away from home, and this is really interesting. Little woo woo for some people, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of evidence that animals have. I don't want to say they just have energy knowledge, right? And so he was talking about he would go away for several days, and on the day he was supposed to come back, they would come by the entrance
They
gate
know.
to meet him. They
Mhm.
know. So he was, I believe he was in Paris when he died. I'm not sure. He was at a conference and he died of a massive heart attack. And that day that he died, the elephants, because now they had increased the size, so their
Yeah.
reserve is huge. They came to the house and stayed at the house for multiple days, and then a year exactly on his 1 year anniversary, they came back and into the house, and they don't go to the house that often. They have
Yeah.
those days. So super touching.
Mm,
That's the the
chilling.
impact that he had. Yeah, it's huge, huge.
Absolutely incredible. Um, so we've talked about elephants and tigers and lions and cheetahs. Are there any lesser known African species that you adore and that you've photographed?
Gosh, I love all of them.
I know.
The one big one we haven't talked about is leopards. But yeah,
Leopards. Okay.
a
Yeah.
lot of so most people want to go when they go to Africa, they want to see the big cats. And
Right.
that's the most exciting thing. But it's like if you sit in a herd of zebras or any other, like, you sit with some gazelles, or you sit with hyenas, or you sit with any of the lesser, more common, right? Because there's so many of them, you kind of forget to pay attention because, like, there's not as many lions, there's not as many cheetahs. So you want to, like, spend time with them. But
Yeah.
sitting just in a herd and watching them, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch their behavior and to not be rushed and to just like watch life play out.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I wanted to ask about like your prep to go on safari. Again, I'm only able to reference like the 90s when my grandparents went, but they had a bunch of shots that they had to take with like big needles. Is it still that same way or is it a little easier to, to get yourself to Africa now?
So it really depends on your own personal health history.
True.
If you want to jump between African countries, then a yellow fever vaccine is required
Mhm.
unless you have a note from your doctor. A yellow fever vaccine is not recommended for people. I think it's either over 70 or 75. I'm not sure.
Mm,
People would
okay.
have to look that up. Please don't quote me on that age. So like my mom has gone to Africa and we just brought it. I brought her there and she was over the age where yellow fever would be safe. And so we brought the paper. She didn't have any problems, but we also didn't country hop
Okay.
because that's a little bit more difficult.
Mhm.
Um, Typhoid is always recommended, and that's either an oral vaccine or a shot vaccine.
Mhm.
I did hepatitis A and hepatitis B, and I didn't do it for many, many years in the beginning, but because I go so often, I went ahead
Yeah.
and did those. Malaria medication, so to prevent getting malaria. And again, if you like, I always bring it with me, but
Yeah.
I so rarely have to take it because there's, the time of year that I go usually. I mean, I go lots of different times, but there's not a lot of mosquitoes. And so I prefer, to not take it unless I'm being bothered. So
Yeah.
it's pretty easy. And nowadays, it used to be like the first time I went to find a travel doctor was really kind of difficult, but now
Yeah.
it's much easier. There's like Passport Health, like all over the United States. I don't know about in other countries, but they'll go
Okay.
in, they'll tell you, they'll make recommendations, and then you can read the recommendations and say yes, no, yes, no. Most of the time when you're going on safari, unless you're camping or you're staying
Mhm.
at low end lodges, The food and water are completely safe, so you don't have
Oh,
to worry
okay.
about that. If you're not eating, I don't do street food because I'm very sensitive. So I just don't eat
Mm,
street food. I only eat at tourist, mid to high tourist areas, and I've never had any kind of issues. So,
awesome.
yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking about a friend of mine who was in with Greenpeace, and she had gone to Africa, but I think she was in Chad, and she there was a lot of eating with your hands where she was when with the homestay that she was doing as well. But again, it sounds like, especially on safari or with with a higher end lodge, you're going to have your own meal. You don't need to share with
Yeah, and
and
it's
so
a
on.
very different thing when you're volunteering, and doing something like Greenpeace versus going as a tourist, right?
Right.
Because as a tourist, when you're doing like a Greenpeace thing, you're there to help the less fortunate, right? So
Right.
you're not in the wilds, you're not staying at lodges, you're not staying, these lodges, they have reputations. They don't want their tourists getting sick. If their tourists get sick, it gets out, right?
Exactly.
So it's
Yeah.
it's a very different situation, and that's why I said unless you're camping or
Mm,
doing some volunteer work where you're not really sure how safe is the water, how safe is the food going to be, what's the food prep like, is it clean, is
yeah.
it sanitary? Yeah, then you might want to have a lot more vaccines. But if you're
Makes
going
perfect
as a
sense.
tourist and you're staying at even low mid range, yeah, you're good.
If you were to plan a trip, and I mean, people who are considering this can certainly reach out to Lisa for help and consulting. But how much time from actually, the idea and conception of going to actually getting there, like how long does it take, or how much time do you suggest to plan?
So that depends if you want to go during high season. And
Which
it
and
depends.
which is when?
So high season is usually American summer
Okay.
because that's when a lot of people are traveling. It's also like if you're in Kenya, if you want to go to Kenya, that's also when the Great Migration is happening. July, August, September is the height of that. So
Wow.
lodges will book out easily a year in advance.
Okay.
Easily. So if you want to see the Great Migration, and the Great Migration goes from Kenya into the Serengeti, so Masai Mara, Kenya, into the Serengeti, Tanzania, and they just do this big circle. What
Okay.
most people think of when they think of the Great Migration is the river crossings. Now, there are rivers in Tanzania, but the river crossings that you see on documentaries and stuff, that
Yeah.
happens in Kenya. And so that's where most people want to go to see the migration is Kenya and the Masai Mara. That will book out easily over a year in advance. So if people want to go
Mm,
see that and yeah, there's lodges outside the park that you can stay in and then drive an hour to get to the park gate. And by then, it makes for really long days. But I would suggest
yeah.
in those situations, you want to book out a year and a half in advance. If you're going to go
Okay.
during the non-high season, or there's green season, which is March, April, May. And I don't
Yes.
recommend green season for first timers because it's a lot of rain. And so like I would go during green season because I've been there before, but that
Yeah.
you can book almost last minute. So it really
Okay.
depends. And it also depends on where you're trying to go. So which
Okay.
country you're trying to go to and when their high season is, as to how long you need. But I would say a year. I find it's really interesting. I'm on a lot of different like travel groups and female
Yeah.
travel groups, and it blows my mind when people are like, "Oh, yeah, I just I have my tickets to Kenya. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. Where should I go? Where should I stay?
Oh
What do you
God.
recommend?" And I'm like,
Oh.
right? Like, if you have a dream of seeing something or doing something, it's probably not going to happen. If you just want to go and wing it, then that's a different story. But if you really want
Yeah.
to have a safari where you see the most amount of animals or specific types of species or something like that, planning a year minimum, I
Yeah.
would suggest. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah,
All
I
right.
am more than happy if somebody has questions or whatever, they can reach out to me via email, social media, and I'm happy to help answer questions about that.
I'm really looking forward to that planner that you're creating, but also it, and this conversation has just really sparked another not another, but just like a resurgence of interest in getting there. I don't know when that's going to be. I got a kid that I got to get through high school first, but all that good stuff. But hopefully in the future, that's something that I can do. And again, I look forward to the books that you have coming out and reading more about these amazing stories. And I just thank you so much for being here today. This was really educational.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I really enjoyed our time together, and I hope people have learned a little bit about animals and conservation and some of the problems they're facing, and maybe have a desire to go on a safari. And I just wish, like, once you go, it gets under your skin. So it's awesome.
I think so. It seems like it's incredibly addictive, like to be able to go and to have those experiences that are just so once in a lifetime. So for those of you who want to connect with Lisa on Instagram, it's just her name, at Lisa M. Roberti, Roberti. And also her website is lisaroberti.com. And of course, art.lisaroberti.com. And of course, I'll link all of these. But thanks everybody for being here. And I can't wait to bring Lisa back to talk about her next adventure.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Sarah.
Lisa.
Have a great day.